As you're all aware, the theme for the weekend is heroes. And again, heroes come in all forms and all ages. You know, again, you look at it and you have to realize that, again, there have always been heroes down through time. I remember growing up, one of my heroes was the Lone Ranger. Now today they call him the Loner Ranger, but anyway. Anyway, and then of course biblical heroes from Joshua, Joseph, David, and there are a lot of heroes you can name from down through the time. The Bible records a number of individuals and events in both the Old and New Testament, though, that on the surface, you just glance at it and read it, may not seem heroic, may not seem like they're heroes. But again, upon closer examination, we may be surprised. Now, the traditional idea of a hero is someone who died for a cause. But there are others who are everyday heroes who give their life every day for a cause. Definition of a hero, it says, quote, a hero is often seen as someone who is admired for their courage, selflessness, and noble qualities, and who's willing to take risks and make sacrifices in order to help others or achieve noble goals. Now, again, what's a hero in real life? Well, it's part of that. But Jesus Christ defined it a little bit differently. And again, in John chapter 15, verse 13, you don't have to turn there if you don't want to right now. We'll be turning some scriptures later. But John 15, verse 13, in his last conversation with his disciples, said simply, greater love has no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. Greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his friends. Now, you stop and you look at it and you think about it. Again, we think about the various things. I grew up in the church all the way from the 1950s, and I remember the idea that, well, some of us are going to die as martyrs. You're going to give your life for the truth of God. And that's true in some cases. But a lot of others have lived as martyrs for years and given their life for God's way. And some of those we don't think about. Some of those we don't really think about. I've thought a lot of terms, and again, think of martyrdom. I remember growing up, Of course, when I grew up, we were told you can't understand the truth because you're carnal. You're just a carnal kid. Eventually, you'll understand the truth. And guess what? I graduated from high school, went to Ambassador College, got baptized, and it was what I thought all along. It wasn't something totally new because we grew up with it. But anyway, you notice that the title for my seminar is He Ain't Heavy, Father, He's My Brother. And again, that comes from, some people know this already, but that's the motto from Boys Town in Nebraska. I want to give you just a couple of minutes here to look a little bit of background on this. It actually happened back in 1918, only a year after Boys Town started in 1917. A boy named Howard Loomis was abandoned by his mother at Father Flanagan's Home for Boys, which had just opened. Sure, he was abandoned because he had polio. If any of you remember back to the polio days, he had all the great big metal braces on and everything else, and had trouble getting around, couldn't take care of himself. And again, he wore those heavy leg braces. Walking was very difficult for him, especially going up steps. And climbing steps. And again, soon, several of the boys' home's older boys were seen picking him up literally and carrying him up and down the steps. So he didn't have to do that. He could do it. Now, one day, Father Flanagan asked Reuben Granger, another one of the boys, how hard is that? You guys do that all. How hard is that? And the answer was, he ain't heavy, Father, he's my brother. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. And that is stuck with one of their motto ever since. And again, it's a very moving story. You look at it, and quite frankly, most of us in our history in the church, at some point in time, have had to be carried. And also, most of us at some point in time have helped doing the carrying. And again, helping someone to care about them. You know, you look at it, any of you go back to, well, most of you go back to the 80s, and you want to remember a song that was popular back in the 80s, "We all need somebody to lean on." Wrote over and over. And again, that's very true. So in the seminar today, we're going to take some time and look at some of the unsung heroes of the Bible. Unsung heroes that largely go unrecognized in society and the church. Talking about caregivers. Caregivers. You know, family and otherwise. Those who lay down their lives daily to care for somebody else. Either a father, a mother, a mate, a child, or in some cases just a friend. And again, in fact, you look at it, and today nationally, would you believe about 17% of all adults, 17% of all adults, that's about 50 million Americans, are caregivers. Not all of them full-time, but all of them helping out or taking care of somebody. 50 million. That's hard to fathom. You stop and think about it. And again, as we look at it, in a recent survey of our north central region in Congo, we had 11% of the entire church attendance in all the churches in this area, going on up into Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We had 11% of all the people, all the members, are giving caregiving to somebody. And I'm not talking about just, hey, we just take a meal back. I'm talking about serious caregiving. And again, as we look at it, these caregivers range from the ill, aged, several of the serious diseases like cancer, heart, dementia. 11%. That means in any one of our given churches here in this region, you look around, there are at least 2 or 3 people taking care of somebody else. Now, we're going to begin by looking at several examples of these individuals from both the Old and the New Testament. Then I want to conclude by looking at some ways that we can help the helpers, help the caregivers. Now, before I start, I want to make a statement here. I don't want to be misunderstood that I'm in some way down on people who can't do it, or down on people who have family members in nursing homes. There are times for everybody. Some people are better able to take care of this job on both physically and emotionally. Some are not. Some diseases need 24 hours, 7 day a week people to help change things and that. So again, don't misunderstand. I'm not trying to say, hey, everybody ought to do this, because this doesn't work. No, there's a time for both, and the time for someone going into a nursing home or assisted living has to be a family decision. And again, there's so many different factors into it. Just want to make sure I make that clear, because again, I'm not down on anybody doing that. I talked about this a little bit at the feast in Branson this year. And I had a couple people come, well, we can't do it. Are you down? Why are you down on us? I'm not down on anybody. Everybody's got a spot they can do. Everybody's got a spot they can't do. And we have to recognize that. Now, let's look at some biblical caregivers. Anybody think of an example of a biblical caregiver?
Ruth.
What? Ruth. Yes, very definitely. What about anybody else?
Midwives.
What's that?
The midwives.
I'm sorry?
The midwives.
Midwife? Yeah. Well, I've got 7 examples I'm going to look at briefly. 4 of them have names. 3 of them we don't even know who they are. We're going to look at it and see. And the first one, as we said, is Ruth. Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi. Let's look at Ruth chapter 1, if you will. We do want to turn there. Ruth chapter 1. And as you turn there, I want to bring out a couple of points. Remember, Ruth was a Moabitess. Ruth was not from Israel or Judah. And she met her husband in Moab, and they got acquainted and got married there. Now, Again, Ruth, daughter-in-law Naomi, was a very unique individual. I'm going to read this from the NIV, and we're going to begin verse 6 and just skim through. Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come in the aid of his people. She and her daughter-in-laws prepared to return home. Remember, her husband and her sons had both died. Just her with her two young daughters-in-law, both of whom were not Israelite, not from the area. And again, verse 7 says, with her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where they had been and set out on the long road to go back to Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your own mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you've shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. And goes on, may the Lord grant each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud. They said to her, we will go back with you to your people. You know, you're an elderly lady. You got nobody else around. And again, Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who you can become your husbands? Goes on down through this. And so they did that. And verse 14, they all wept again, and Oprah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. That word clung there is very, very interesting. It means to hold on to in a very close relationship, to really hang on tightly in a very close relationship. And Naomi said, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Now the next verse tells you what type of a person Ruth was. Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I'm going to stay. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. That's a pretty strong commitment from someone who absolutely knew nobody in Judah. She's leaving behind all that she knows, everybody she knows, and I'm going to go there. And she says, where you die, I will die, and there I will also be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you from me. Then Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, and she stopped urging her. It's a fantastic story, just a very short time. We all know what happened later. But look where she is. She's lost everything, lost all of her family, and she's willing to turn her back on her family, turn her back on her nation, to go help Naomi. Now Naomi went back. She was going back as a widow. The widows ended up doing the gleaning in the corners of the field. They were all poor. So again, Ruth was willing to sacrifice all those things to go back and to be with Naomi. Now let's look at another one, an Old Testament example, maybe not quite so familiar. Anybody remember the name Abishag? Abishag, you remember Abishag? It's a real name. Abishag is the young lady who took care of David as he was dying. A beautiful young lady who put her life on hold to go take care of David. You find it over in 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1. Now King David was old, advanced in years, and they put covers on him because he could not get warm. Anybody here have trouble staying warm as you get older? You know. Therefore his servant said to him, let a young woman, a virgin, be sought out for our Lord the king, and let her stand before him, and let her care for him. Let her lie in his arms, so he may stay warm. So he sought out a lovely young woman throughout all of Israel, and Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. She stayed there and she took care of David day and night until he died. What happened to her afterwards? The Bible doesn't say. According to some of the Jewish customs, as a member of the household, she stayed as a part of that household the rest of her life. It's pretty strong example of somebody who just lays down their life and is done. They take care of him. And David couldn't generate enough heat. What happened? Now we know that Solomon's brother wanted to marry her as a plot to take over the kingdom. And Solomon said, And, there's a little bit of tradition. We don't have any idea on it. A little bit of tradition that maybe this is even the Shunammite that is the subject of Song of Solomon. We don't know that. Again, it may or may not be, but again, it's an interesting situation. Somebody who dedicated their life, set things on the side. Let's go to the New Testament now. Look at Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. I'm surprised no one really thought about this one, but Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 14. It says, when Jesus had come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother lying sick with a fever. Peter's mother-in-law was apparently living with Peter. And she was there. And how do I know she was living there? There's nothing that says definitely, but if you look at the next verse, he touched her, and the fever left her, and she got up and made a meal for him. If she was just a guest, the chances of her doing that are very slim in those days especially. So here's Peter's wife's mother. Peter and his wife apparently taking care of her mother in her old age, helping to take care of her and helping to provide for her. So again, you look at it, he healed her, she got up and made a meal for him. Again, she was at home there. And again, many times the widows and elderly were taken care of and covered by their family. Now, let's look at another one here in the New Testament, found in John 19. John 19. John 19, verses 25 and 27. Christ is hanging on the cross. He's just about dying. The next few verses talk about his death. John chapter 19, verse 25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother, Mary, his mother's sister, Mary, and the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. They were there around a lot of times, helping him, being there and serving. But what happens here? And when Jesus therefore saw his mother, he's hanging there dying. He looks down, and there's these three women. He glances over here, and there's one of the apostles who's probably the closest to, John. And he makes a very definite statement here. If we look at it and read it, he saw them, his mother and the disciple whom he loved. He said, Mother, behold. Notice, listen, this is important. Behold, here is your son. Here is your son. He's up there dying. He looks out and he says, Mom, John is your son now. And he looked his mother's in the eyes. And then he turns to John and he says, Behold, or listen, this is your mother. Take care of her and provide for her. That's from the Amplified Version. Take care of her and provide for her. So she was there as a person, and God's very important. John took her and she lived with him and lived the rest of her life out with him. Now, John was a whole lot younger than she was. John was about the age of Christ. So, John helped her and took care of her the whole rest of her life. Again, very, very obvious? No. As far as heroes, but very, very definitely doing what Christ said, laying down your life. And they did it. Now, heroes come in all kinds of... I'm not saying this. You don't have to be a caregiver to be a hero. I'm just focusing on this one issue, though, today. Because that's an issue I've become rather intimately acquainted with in the last 5 years. And again, you look at it, and I look at people, and during the Feast of Tabernacles, I made a comment on one of the days after my sermon, how much I appreciated the caregivers and said, "You're my heroes." I had 3 people come up to me after services with tears in their eyes, saying how much that statement meant to them. And again, I thought, hey, you know what? We need to get this information out to a lot more people. I'm in the process right now writing a couple of articles that will appear a little later on. But again, you look at it. Now let's take just a couple of minutes now, and let's look at 3 examples. They're anonymous. We don't know who they are. We don't know who they are. First is Mark chapter 9. Mark chapter 9. This is about a man with a little boy. Mark chapter 9. Verse 18. Mark chapter 9 and verse 18. Get it right here in a second. And we find that a man came up, and verse 17 says, "Teacher, I brought my son who has a mute spirit." He's had a problem. And to his disciples, and they couldn't do anything with him. Wherever it goes, it seizes him and throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. It's not like obviously a form of, in this particular case, a form of seizures. And they couldn't cast it out. It's an old faithless generation. Then they brought him to him, and he saw him. He immediately, the spirit left him. And he said, verse 21, "How long has this been happening?" And the man said, "From childhood," or from infanthood. Again, a father who dedicated his life to taking care of a son who had major problems. We don't know the man's name. One of these days, I have an idea we will. Another of Christ's healings. Look at Luke chapter 5. You might not think of these, but think about what's involved. Luke chapter 5 and verse 19. You remember Jesus went into a house, and he was in the middle of it, and people were coming from all over the place to be healed. And these people, probably family members, someone brought this man who couldn't walk. He was paralyzed, and he was on a bed, and they couldn't get in. They couldn't get in, so these people, none named, went up on the roof and lowered him down through the roof. Now, I ask you, is that dedication to service? Absolutely. You might not think about it. Absolutely. And he let him down, and he healed him. He let him down, and Christ healed him. Again, so we look at it, and he said, "Man, your sins are forgiven." But again, when he did that, he said, "Okay, take up your bed," verse 24, "take up your bed and walk." Now, you talk about amazing. This man's never walked. He's been and all of a sudden, he gets up and walks. Guess what? I bet there were several people really happy. Not only him, but his caregivers. Okay, let's look at one more here, and then we'll go on to something else. Acts chapter 3. Again, no name. No name. This is right after the day of Pentecost. Right after the day of Pentecost, and the disciples, particularly Peter and John, are gone into the synagogue. The hour of prayer. They went into the temple. And again, you notice what happened. A certain man, lame from his mother's womb, paralyzed from his mom's womb, was what? Was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, that he might ask for donations, ask for charity. We think about the man, but what about the people who carried him there every day? Out of the house, all the way over there. And they undoubtedly were taking care of him at other times. This just says what they did on that particular occurrence. You know, those are a few examples. I'm sure if you looked at it, you could come up with some more. But before we go further, I want to give you another definition. Definition of a caregiver. A caregiver is a person who attends to the needs and concerns of a person with short or long-term limitations, whether it's due to illness, injury, disability, or simply age. A person who tends to the needs and concerns of a person with short or long-term. You know, it's interesting. With this survey we did of the North Central region, the larger percentage of the caregivers, we had 51 caregivers in the North Central region. The largest percentage, almost 70%, have been taking care of somebody for 3 or more years. That's pretty impressive. But again, you look at it, and as I said again, well, about 10% in this particular region. Now, they go through their life doing what? They go through their life taking care of and caring for someone else. Again, remember, I'm not saying everybody is designed, everybody can do that, everybody should do that. But the rest of the thing I'm going to talk about here is something everybody can do. Everybody can do. The job title of caregiver includes a lot of you people here in this room even, I'm sure. And those who are doing it are among my heroes. You daily lay down your life, postpone personal things to care for a family member. You know, I personally know in my own example, my own life, of 3 people, young people who literally put their life on hold to care for parents. One of them's a relative. The other 2 are people I know very, very closely. They just simply said, this is what I got to do right now. Now again, some people can't do that, some people can. It's not an issue one way or the other. But again, we look at it, that's truly sacrifice. Now, think back to the examples we just looked at of biblical caregivers. What would have happened to those individuals had there not been somebody there to help? What would have happened to Naomi without Ruth? She'd have gone back and she'd have been basically a beggar, gleaning in fields and that type thing. What would have happened to David had he not had Abishag? There's nothing worse than being cold all the time. She's put and laid down her life to take care of him. Now you stop and think about it. What would have happened if Christ had neglected to give instructions to John about his mother? I have an idea John would have done it anyway. The bigger problem might have been his mother saying, I don't want you to go out of your way to do me and take care of me. I'll get by somehow. We've all heard those words, hadn't we? I'll get by somehow, but So again, Christ in his dying breath with 2 more witnesses of her closest friends said, Mom, this is your son. Go to him and let him take care of you. If he hadn't done that, we don't know. I'm sure there's the things that would have worked, but you stop and you look at it and think about it. You look at it and what if she had resisted it? We all know of caregivers in our congregation. Let me just ask you, show of hand, how many of you have somebody who's a caregiver in your congregation, taking care of somebody in your congregation? Okay, most of you. And again, you look at it. And again, there are probably some you don't know about. Because caregivers aren't looking for accolades. They're busy helping people and helping doing somebody. They do the job because they're dedicated and care for the individual needing care. They see the young man with the heavy braces and say, he ain't heavy, he's my brother. Now, how can those of us in the congregations do to acknowledge and help those who are caregivers? I've got a few things here, and we'll discuss here just in the remaining time. Stop and look at it. Galatians chapter 5 and Galatians chapter 6 have some good points here. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13. Paul's writing to a Gentile church here. Galatians chapter 5 Verse 13, for you, brethren, have been called to liberty, where we're free. But don't use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh getting more involved physically, but through love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled, and see you love your neighbor as yourself. So again, serve one another. Try to help out. Let's look over to chapter 6, just across the page here. Chapter 6, verse 2. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law. We're told to help each other with all their cares and their burdens they carry. Now, I'm going to talk here a moment. That's awkward at times. That's very awkward at times. Because a lot of times, a caregiver is very, very, very close and intimately involved in a right way with the person needing the care. And as such, they want to be there. They feel a need to be there. And they feel guilty if they're not there. I know this for a fact. I've experienced it. But I've also had the opportunity since Mr. Franks had that impromptu interview with me in July. I've had the opportunity. I've had 17 church members give me a call saying, hey, what can you tell us? We're starting to experience it. What can you tell us? How can we? And almost to a person, well, I want to be there with them all the time. You know what my response is? If you're there with them all the time, you'll be dead before they are. If you're there with them all the time, you're going to be in the bed beside them, or you're going to die before they do. Because the idea of caregiver burnout is very real. Very real. And they need some help occasionally. So how can we do it? Number one, some people like numbers. So number one, recognize and express gratitude to them. Learn who they are and let them know you appreciate the job they're doing. You know, how many times have you thanked somebody like that for their labor of love? Putting their life on hold, as it were, in some cases. Look at it and take care of it. You know, ask them, how do you express the labor of love? Hey, maybe occasion. You say, I can't do anything, but hey, do you cook? Do you know how to make a pie? You know how to make a hot dish? Occasionally, call, hey, I'd like to bring something over to you, just to help you give you a break. Help give you a break. But again, a prepared meal or perhaps a note or a card. Point number two, offer to help out at church or other church events. You know, from the beginning, I have tried to be totally open with my wife's condition. She's in the latter stages of Alzheimer's. I've tried to be totally open with my congregations and other people. And the response, frankly, has been amazing. We go to church, and there's 3 or 4 women who will come up here. Let me help your wife. Let me take your wife. Let me take her to the bathroom. Let me get her some refreshments. Let me sit with her and visit with her for a while. Yet you know something? Before I did it, I had friends, very close friends, well-meaning friends. When I asked the church for prayers for my wife, they said, with Alzheimer's, are you sure you want to do that? And I said, why not? Alzheimer's is no different than heart trouble. It's no different than cancer. They're all the same. You know, heart trouble is simply a disease of the brain. Emphysema is a disease of the lungs. Arthritis is a disease of the joints. But they're all diseases that God heals. But people are very hesitant. And I'm going to get to that. Try to help them out at church when they need it, however you can. Maybe helping them get to the car or get in or whatever. Number 3, really get acquainted with them. It takes time, but become familiar with the situation, the people specifically. Because I'll tell you what, you're going to be a lot more able to help out once they know you and feel confident around you. We all know we got a lot of friends at church, but how well do we know them? How much do we say, well, hey, I know that person, I would trust them with my mate. You know. So get acquainted with them, become familiar. Watch how they do things. Because with caregivers, you find out that young people, no matter what their disease problem is, if they have care, you have certain routines, you have certain ways you approach certain things that people get used to. Now, once you're accepted, see if there's any way you can help them and give them a little time away. You know, I'll ask a question here. I don't want to see hands on this one, but just ask a question. How many of us to really help somebody could spare one period of 2 to 3 or 4 hours once a month? I think most of us could. And yet, how many of us do? Not because we don't want to, it's because we're kind of shy and embarrassed. Wouldn't know how to approach it. Hey, just say, hey, is there some way I can help you? Is there something I can do for you? And again, you look at it. Perhaps you could give 2 or 3 hours one time a month, give them a break. You know, caregiving is especially stressful, and especially in cases of dementia. It's very, very stressful. Now, again, you look at it, Alzheimer's caregivers burnout is a real issue and danger. The communicable disease CDC of the government, the Alzheimer's Association, aging.org, a lot of different sites that talk about it. You know, caregivers are dedicated to the person. They may feel no one else can do the job as well as they do, which may be true, but that still means, hey, they still need to get a break occasionally and be willing to say, hey, how about if I just, you know what, you say, hey, how about if I come over and the person's able to get around, how about if I come over and I take her and we go down to Steak and Shake and get a malt? Or if you're really healthy conscious, we can go to Tropical Smoothie and get a spinach smoothie. As for me and mine, we'll settle for the malt. But anyway. Point number 4, call or visit them occasionally. Call or visit them occasionally. Make a point at church to just stop and talk with them a little bit. Because again, if you're a caregiver, you got a lot of time in your church, you got to kind of stay close to the person. But again, a text, if they have a cell phone or a card, would be very greatly appreciated. Caregiving can become very, very, very lonely. Very lonely. Especially in cases of dementia, because the person you're sitting there with can't understand what you're saying. And you find yourself talking to yourself, because that's the only intelligent form of life around. But again, it's not anybody's fault. Point number 5, pray for strength and encouragement for them specifically. If you're aware of them, mention specific needs. Mention specific needs. Point number 6. Hope you don't feel I'm stopped preaching and went to meddling here. But point number 6. Get over your terror of not being able to help. Get over the terror of not being in the terror. Oh no! I don't know what to do. You know, none of us know what to do the first time. Guess what? You look at it. Get better acquainted with both the caregiver and the person needing care. Now, there can be a fear of, well, what if? Well, what if something happens while I'm there? Well, hey, you got your grown-up britches on. Help figure it out, you know. Sometimes you have to just take action because, you know. But again, a lot of times you say, hey, look, I know what to do in this case. I know what to do in this case. You know, you look at it, and the conduct and conversation of a person with dementia, you know, again, hey, bearing it here. I'm sitting with my wife occasionally, she'll start talking. I say, huh? She'll just keep talking. Because guess what? She's not talking to me, she's talking to all those little people that are around the room. It's called hallucinations. It's real. I tried several times at the beginning early on to, no, dear, there's nobody here but you and me. Guess what? She said, "You're lying. I see them." So I finally started to the point where I say, "Okay, I'll take care of it. I love you. I'm going to take care of it. I'll make sure they all leave. I'll get rid of them all." Which isn't a lie. I'm getting rid of everybody that's there. But again, sometimes you have to meet them where they are. And again, sometimes, hey, I understand that can be terrifying. But it can also be a huge help. My wife has, probably 5 or 6 ladies who give her a call occasionally. I admire them for doing that because she recognizes their voice. But after that, who knows where the conversation is going to go? She may talk to you about all those kids running around and all the damage they're doing, or all these people trying to get to her and hurt her. There's nobody there. But you know what? After it's all over, she really enjoyed that call. Man, she's just on cloud 9. And she's not alone. I've seen 3 other people do the same thing. Just being able to be there. And again, you look at it. So, again, there are times in my own life I'll pick up the phone and call one of my buddies. And I'll say, "Hey, don't get worried. I don't need anything at all. I just need somebody to talk to." Little things you learn along the way, little tricks that'll help you be able to help out. Like I said, hopefully most of you will never have to have the responsibility of a full-time caregiver. But there's still a lot that you can do helping other people. There's a lot you can do. You look at it. Point number 7. This is where the rubber meets the road. Resolve in your mind to make this weekend a changing point where you begin to look at, how can I help others? How can I do that? How can I get involved and help Mrs. Whatchamacallit with her husband? Or help Mr. So-and-so with his wife? How can I get involved and help so-and-so with their mom and dad? They love to have someone else come and visit with them. Come and see them. Doesn't have to be a long visit. It'll be short times. Now, I would say if you're going to do that with someone who's and has a caregiver, call and make sure it's a decent time before you just show up. Otherwise, they'll probably still appreciate you, but you might be surprised what you run into. So anyway, resolve to make this a changing point in your life from your interaction and caring for people needing care and the caregiver who sacrifice their time. It's very important. In closing, look at Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. Verse 4. Verse 3, Christ says, and Paul says, "Let nothing be done through selfish ambition and conceit, but in lowliness of mind and humility, each esteem others better than himself." Hey, brethren, people who need caregivers are your brothers and sisters. People who are caregivers are your brothers and sisters. They're all just like we are. We're all headed toward the kingdom of God. All headed toward the kingdom of God. In my 30 years here in this area, I've adopted a motto. And I don't have to tell you what it is. It's on my tie. Someone gave me this tie in my retirement. It says, "Keep on keeping on. Keep on going." Because again, that's what we're all here for. We're here to lean on each other, to help each other. But again, we're to become a living sacrifice. He goes on, "Let each of you look not only on his own interest," verse 4, "but also on the interest of others." Become other-minded. The world's full of self-minded people. We need more other-minded people. In closing, I want to again thank the caregivers among us. You truly are heroes in the truest sense. For the rest of us, let's never forget, we ought to help bear one another's burdens. And one way is, he ain't heavy, Father, he's my brother.